Are you looking for ways to get through stacks of 12 by 12 patterned paper without making more scraps? Hi, I'm Jess from JessCrafts.com, and I'm here to help you make the most of your crafty supplies and time. So let's get making. Today I have 12 by 12 paper busting template for A2 cards number 40, and it is available in a pack in the Etsy shop, but there are also 30 plus free templates available at jesscrafts.com if you'd like to try out another one first. I will be really clear with the measurements though, so you can recreate this card even if you don't have the printed out template. The idea is that I'm going to create some A2 size cards without making pattern paper scraps. They'll all look exactly the same, and today I'm making 8 cards with one sheet. So I'm going to have these 8 focal point images for my 8 cards, and I'm going to have 2 strips for each card, so a total of 16 strips. I am starting with, I'll get back to these stamps later. I'm starting with Echo Park Birthday Boy balloons patterned paper. And it has these really simple stars on one side, which would be a great place for my focal point. And then on the other side, it has those birthday balloons. I was a little bit hesitant about using this pattern paper because I'm worried that the balloons, once I cut them into those smaller strips, might not be clearly balloons. But I think it's going to work. And so the very first thing that I need to do, as you see in the sketch, is we're going to be cutting strips that are 5.5 inches long, which is the full width of an A2 size card, and they're going to be 3/4 inch tall. So as you're using a paper trimmer or any other tools, please follow all manufacturer safety instructions so that you are using them correctly. Okay, so now I have a piece of paper that's 5.5 by 12 inches long. I am going to cut this 5.5 by 12 inch piece of pattern paper into 3/4 inch strips. So I'm going to measure from the long side. So rather than bringing it to 3/4 inch every time, which would be then putting it so close to the edge and it'd be kind of like difficult, I like to just measure from the far edge. So I'm taking it to 11 1/4, so subtracting 3/4, then to 10.5, and to 9 3/4 and 9 inches. I'm not going to say every single measurement. I realize that eventually you'll be able to continue on with the math there, but I did want to show you my method, and you're going to keep cutting until you have 16 strips that are 5.5 by 3/4 inch. And as you can see, I think that you can tell these are balloons. This may not be the ideal use of this pattern paper. It might not be for everyone, but that is how I'm going to use it today. So I'll keep cutting those. And then the other cuts that we're going to need to make is this piece of paper that's left is 6.5 inches. We're going to start by cutting that in half to 3.25 inches. Now this does work with directional patterned paper. However, the side that I'm going to use today isn't directional. And then we are going to cut these into 3-inch strips. Sorry, not strips, 3-inch. They're not quite squares because they're 3.25 on one side and 3 inches on the other. So I went from 12 to 9, because that's 3 inches, to 6 to 3. Now, as you can see, not quite square, a little bit longer, but if I were going to use these on the final card, I would have the strips at the top and bottom, and my directional patterned paper would still work. However, what I'm going to do is turn it over and use that blue side. And we're going to cut that second piece, that's 3.25 by 12, into those 3-inch pieces again. Next, I want to talk about card bases. Normally I just use white card bases, and they're A2 size, and I do have a video where I explain how to make your own card bases with white cardstock. But I have noticed, I go through my white cardstock, and I have a lot of other colored cardstock, which I also keep in the thicker 110 or 100 pound cardstock from Michaels and Recollections or Park Lane. And I'm going through my white pretty fast, but then I find there's certain colors of plain cardstock that I'm not going through. And so I've decided that I'm going to turn some of them into card bases when it makes sense. So like this particular card, I think the pattern paper will work well with this blue as a card base. And then this is a blue, like this particular blue, I'm just noticing I have a whole lot of it. It's not getting used very readily. And so that is why I'm going to make them into card bases. So when I make card bases, I take the 8.5 by 11 piece of paper and I cut it to 5.5 by this 8.5 side. Then I take a scoring board, and now you could just fold these in half, and I've talked about that. Sorry, my camera will not focus very well on plain cardstock like this, so I'm trying to make sure I keep my hand there, but if it unfocuses, that's what's going on. Okay, so then when I have my scoring board, I can score it. I have an A2 mark on my scoring board, but that's 4 1/4 inch. So I'm scoring it at 4 1/4. You can fold it in half. And this is something that I have addressed in, like I said, a specific video in some of my past card classes. I have a birthday card class and things like that. So if you're looking for some additional ideas. So I'm going to make 8 cards that are A2 size out of this piece or out of this color of blue cardstock, so I can use that up a little bit. And then the other thing I'm going to need to do is cut some cardstock mats. Now on the sketch, it calls for the mats. It shows you them very clearly what size they should be. So it is 5.5 by 3/4 with a 5.5 by 1 inch mat, because 5.5 is the entire length of an A2 size card. So you're going to just take a 5.5 by 1 inch mat. Now you can cut these really efficiently out of cardstock because you are going to be cutting them. So if you had the 11-inch side, you would be cutting it at 5.5. So sorry, which I had just done. And then you would cut those 1 inch strips. You'll be left with 1/2 inch on the bottom. But as you can see, it's a relatively not a lot of cardstock scraps created with that method. However, because I am using a colored card base, and this is my recommendation often, is if you feel like there's like a lot of white space on my card sketches, I have a video where I talk about like different ways you can make the white space more interesting. One being using a colored card base as opposed to a white card base, because sometimes, especially when you're working with like white patterned paper, a patterned paper with a white background. So like the balloons are not white, of course, but the background is. The cardstock, the colored cardstock, really helps it to stand out. But there's also a couple other suggestions in that video. And so today, I think I will put the cardstock mat only on this more square piece, and I will leave these as is. And this yellow color is another color that I found I was not using very much of, so I'm going to use that for cutting my mats today. And they're going to be 1/4 inch bigger. So because it is 3 1/4 by 3 inches, the mat is 3.5 by 3 1/4 inches. So I can start by cutting it to 3.5. I think I'll be able to get 3 out of this. Let's see if I did some quick mental math that worked out there. So then I will cut this, I'm doing 6.5 and then 3 1/4. I'm thinking, so I did cut 3 mats out and then I have this left over. I could do the same thing again, but if I do the quick mental math for real, I do 3.5 times 3. It's going to give me 10.5. So I could even cut the 3/4 inch from this side and cut the 3.5 from the other, like cut 3.5 inch pieces. So I know it's a lot of numbers, but I'll be left with a smaller scrap than this. So if you're really trying to optimize and create the smallest scraps possible, I'm actually going to create a second scrap of that size, despite the fact that I know the math works out. And the reason that I'm going to do that is because I like to make fake foam tape with these scraps. So rather than putting this back in my, I keep my cardstock in these job ticket holders, rather than putting these smallish scraps back in there. And now these are big enough to use for something, especially around a mat on some of my card sketches. I'm actually just gonna glue these together and use this as fake foam tape because I am going to probably want to pop up the critter that I am going to use eventually on this card. So I'll glue that together and have that ready to go so that I can add a little bit of dimension without using some foam tape. Now we're ready to assemble all of our pieces. I have a mat here on my work surface from scrapbook.com, and it has the outline of an A2 card in both portrait and landscape. And this can allow me to, Altenew makes a similar mat as well. This can allow me to line things up pretty straight and also evenly from the top and bottom. I find it to be helpful. I do think it would be nice if there was a few more lines. So these are only 1/2 inch, but 1/4 inch might be a little bit better. But I'm gonna kind of think, okay, I went a little bit up from the line here and the same thing on the top. And just also make sure that it's like, as it comes across the card, does it look pretty similar in terms of where it meets up on the other side? Oh, it's, you know, just this kind of visually a similar amount down. It is basically still eyeballing it, but sometimes just having some kind of lines helps me to go a little bit straighter. And then we will attach this to the yellow cardstock first. I'm beginning to wonder if maybe I should have picked orange cardstock since I'm not going to pull yellow into anywhere else on the card. But I have cut them already and it would be wasteful to not use them. So as you can see, one of the, in the design it calls for you to be showing a little bit of this patterned paper along the top and bottom. So I tried to space it a bit from the top, but not so much that you couldn't see a little bit on the top and bottom of this focal point image. Hopefully that's all really clear. You could line it up all the way with the top if you prefer, but just know that, actually, I guess I can test this out for you, is if I did line it up all the way at the top and the bottom, because it's only 3/4 of an inch, all this math can be done. As you can see, with a mat, it would stretch such that it would cover a little bit of each one. So I like that look too, if you want to like kind of eliminate the mat but don't like the look all around or whatever. I just did kind of an alternate way. I always encourage you to take the measurements and the pieces that I create because they're the no scrap part, and then maybe rearrange them to make it work for you. You could, if you had non-directional pattern paper, you could change the direction of the design. So say I was working with the star side, if I wanted to go like this. Instead, you might also be able to cut the pattern paper that way. It's hard for me to say confidently in the moment, but you know, sometimes you're able to easily just switch it to the other direction. And I think you'd be able to. I think you'd be able to just take this whole thing and turn it on its side, and then you could create the same cards. So I do think it would work in either direction. Even with directional pattern paper, you would just need to kind of plan it out ahead of time so you can get a variety of looks. And so that is the basic design of the card. So if you were just wondering like how to, you know, just assemble the card, you can stop there. I'm gonna go ahead and embellish the card and talk a little bit how I'm gonna finish it off. And I have pre-colored some images from this Lawn Fawn Party Animals stamp set. I do not have the coordinating dies, so I am going to fussy cut out the images. I did Copic color them. I don't have like amazing tips on how to Copic color. I'll show you it up a bit closer. And I do just make some areas darker, like where his tail meets his body is a little bit darker. I tend to use about 3 colors, like 3 colors of marker in each spot. So even though it's all, this whole area is orange, I've used a dark, medium, and light orange. I'll list my colors in the video description. But again, I just don't feel like I have enough to say about it to show you the full process. And when I fussy cut, if that's something that you're curious about, I like Lawn Fawn because they have nice thick lines, so I find it a pretty easy, their stamps to be a little bit easier to fussy cut than some others, although they do have some smaller stamp sets, and those smaller images can be difficult to cut. I will try to be aware of my camera focusing in and out. If I keep it in the center, it's usually pretty good. And I do like to think about like how often I'm going to use a stamp set to determine if I should buy coordinating dies, and also the kinds of images that are in a stamp set. So while fussy cutting out this party hat in a few moments is going to be quite tricky, these animals are actually quite easy to cut out. So there are other stamp sets where I've decided to go for it and buy the dies, but I kind of like to think about like cost per use and like how often will I be using a stamp set. I don't actually make a ton of birthday cards, but if you do, this might be a great one. Something else I wanted to mention while we're here is once you fussy cut, you can take a brush tip marker, and if you fussy cut directly onto the line, you didn't leave any white space, you can run that black brush tip marker around your black stamped lines, and it can kind of just make things look a little bit more like smoothed out. You don't see those white edges of the cardstock. It gives it just a little bit more of a finished look. So taking that brush tip marker around the edges. With this little hat that I cut out, it is a very good chance that those tiny little like things on the top, I don't know what you would call those, like streamers, that's not quite the right word, might come off because they've been fussy cut. You can just cut them right off, and then that will actually save you a lot of trouble. You don't have to use that, and that is something that I've done a couple times when I want to make something easier to fussy cut, is I just decide, hey, it doesn't need that. Like, I mean, you look at these little birds in the stamp set, their hats don't have any of those details, and they're still really cute. So you can save yourself some trouble with fussy cutting by thinking about things like that as well. Once I had it fussy cut out and traced around, I glued the hat onto the fox first, and then I took some of that cardboard scrap that I glued together and I put a little bit of cardstock scrap behind him so that when I glue him down, he has a little bit of dimension and he's not laying exactly flat on the card. Although you could of course do that, but I do find when I'm just using a couple layers of cardstock, it's still generally I'm in the US, remains mailable. Like, it's not so thick that it needs like an extra stamp or something like that. But of course, you know, that's always going to be an individual case by case basis, that kind of thing. But the thinner foam generally does well in mailing situations, or the cardstock. And then I'm going to stamp my sentiment, and I'm going to use Make-A-Wish. I'm basing that on the fact that Make-A-Wish fits across, whereas Happy Birthday is a little too big. I could definitely stack Happy Birthday. There's also the Let's Party sentiment. I'm going to be making 8 of these cards, and I'm going to make them all the same. I thought, well, actually I might switch up the sentiment and do 2 different sentiments or something like that, but I think that, and especially in a stamp set like this, there's a lot of room for, even though you're using the same patterned paper, to change it up. Like I've put this party hat with dots on him, but you could use different party hats, different accessories that they can hold. You can use the different sentiments just to mix it up. And you also might be thinking, okay, this is 8 birthday cards. Like, maybe I need 8 birthday cards for the whole year, but I don't want them to be the same or something like that. And I just wanted to, in case you weren't aware, you can donate cards. There are organizations that accept handmade cards, especially here in the US, although I've collected a list of organizations that you can ship to you can ship your cards to locations in the US and for them to be distributed. But there is a list on my blog. It's always linked in the video description, but I'll link it again so that if you have extra cards, because you're really trying to go through your pattern paper, then you can donate those. Okay, so I have Make-A-Wish, and I am stamping directly onto the pattern paper, which I've already adhered to the card. Usually I don't like to do this, I simply forgot. So normally I would stamp before I would stamp this piece of paper before I adhere it to everything. And I might do that for the other ones, but since it's already attached, I want to make sure that I get a good impression. I could pull out my Misty stamping tool, and that will make sure that I could stamp multiple times in the same area. But here's something else I like to do. And also I like to point this out because you don't need a Misty stamping tool. So I have VersaFine Onyx ink, Onyx Black. This is a pigment ink. I find though that it does dry. Some pigment inks, I have trouble with them ever drying. But it tends to give a pretty crisp, clean impression. and I think the black will be quite readable on that star paper. And so I've stamped it off once onto the back of this paper that I did my coloring on, or cardstock. And just to make sure that my stamp is stamping well, there's no fuzz on it or anything like that, you could absolutely use whatever kind of scrap you have. But since this, you know, even if nothing else, like this is the back of the paper, so you could do that with the, say here, like I wanted to test it out, I want to make sure it's readable. I'm gonna glue this down on its opposite side. So you're gonna see the balloons, you're not gonna see this blue side. I can make sure it's gonna be readable, I'm getting a good impression, there's nothing wrong, and then that's gonna be covered up and you're not gonna be able to see it. Although this is a light paper, so there's a chance it might bleed through. So, you know, at your own discretion there. And then now I'm pretty confident and I'm ready to bring it directly to my card base. Be careful with that little bit of ink because I could have got it on my critter there. So you can consider like cleaning up that kind of ink so that when you're like stamping down or rocking your stamp, sometimes that happens on the blocks. Okay. And I just give it some time to kind of work its way into the paper. Then I'll glue this down and my card will be finished. I will repeat that entire process 7 more times until I have 8 complete cards made with 1 sheet of 12 by 12 pattern paper with no pattern paper scraps. Reviewing the measurements again, so you're going to take your 12 by 12 paper, you're going to cut it to 5.5, and it'll be 5.5 by 12. You're going to cut it to 3/4 inch strips. You'll have 16 of those, and then you're going to cut the remaining 6.5 by 12 inch piece to 3.25, and then to 3, 3, 3, 3. So 12 divided by 3, 4. So you'll have your 4 rectangles, and repeat that. And those are what you're going to need to complete this card in case you do not want to purchase the template, but you do want to use the design. As mentioned though, you can purchase this in the Etsy shop in a pack of 10 or up to 40, because there are 40 in all, sketches that show you how to use 12 by 12 paper to make A2 size cards with no pattern paper scraps. If you found this video helpful, here's another video where you can find more ideas for enjoying your crafty time and supplies. Let me know you like this video to share it to your crafty community, subscribe and click the bell so you don't miss the next template or tutorial, and check the video description for product links. See you in the next video.